Let's try this again. Okay. This one is about the Yakuza, or the underworld organization within Wano, that kind of do business outside of the law, so they're the ones that tend to deal with more like illegal stuff, kind of smuggling or gambling to a degree, different things like that. And we're kind of introduced to kind of two types of the Yakuza throughout the course of this, throughout the course of the Wano arc. We are initially introduced to the Kiroshiro type that are Denjiro in disguise, his family, that are kind of supposed to represent this a little bit more of like the typical, this is a nice business and we wouldn't want anything to happen to it type of a thing. The Yakuza are very similar to the Mafia in that regard, dealing with that type of stuff. To a degree, they also can provide protection for various things. They provide protection for businesses and different things like that. And Denjiro and his, the Kiroshiro and his group do that. It's just they're not seen or viewed as nearly as honorable as Hirogoro and his generation of, the Yakuza were viewed. So it's supposed to be like the Yakuza have kind of declined, but of course, as we learn throughout the course of the story, Denjiro was playing the role of Kiroshiro in order to try to get close to, Orochi, so that way he could then, develop a plan to then try to kill Orochi when he would be at his most vulnerable. And of course, Orochi loves money and people sucking up to him, so that's what Denjiro did. He became Kiroshiro and turned himself into this, the Yakuza boss and everything. And of course, we are then later introduced to, Hirogoro and everything via Shinobu talking about him. And then when Luffy interacts with him during the prison, during the Udon section, which I already discussed in, Hirogoro's video, but I'll do a little bit more for the other Yakuza in this one. The general overview for the Yakuza is, of course, they deal with things in regards to economic, they operate casinos, and of course, they cause problems in casinos and other casinos, and of course there's different rival Yakuza. We kind of learned about that more during like Odin's time, because we don't really have any other Yakuza that we get introduced to with Kiroshiro around. We also see that they are involved when it comes to the courtesans and the red light district, because of course Kiroshiro is able to, of course, he runs one of the brothels that's there, and that is, of course, the pleasure hall where Komurasaki works, and she becomes, the top Oiron in Wano. Of course, we find out later that, of course, Komurasaki is actually Hiyori, and of course she knows that, Kiroshiro is Denjiro, and that it's been part of this whole plan in order for them to be able to kill Orochi and everything. So, we kind of learn that, of course, later on in the story. Loud truck outside, sorry. Or a motorcycle, I don't know. Something. And what ends up happening is, of course, at various times throughout the course of Wano, there's been other Yakuza. The main two generations that we know about are, of course, the generation with Hirogoro and his group that tended to be pretty loyal to the Kozuki family. And then you have Kiroshiro in the more current generation, who was, he was loyal to the Kozuki family, but he had to put on the guise of being loyal to Orochi. And, and all of that stuff. So it's like he has to play up on that. And of course, sometimes they're a little bit more violent and everything like that. I get why they're there. They're kind of there to help, provide protection and things like that. But the thing is that I don't know exactly why it's so much of a big deal, but I don't have since I don't know everything about like how the Yakuza are viewed in Japan. I know they're not necessarily always considered the good guys, but then there's like various anime that have them as like the good guys, like, you know, the Yakuza's Guide to Babysitting, and then there's like that My Yakuza Fiance one that's new that I kind of want to see, and there's other various ones that deal with the Yakuza at various points, as either the main characters or as like pretty prominent characters throughout the course of it. And then you have stuff in My Hero Academia where you have, you know, the Shihei Saikai, who are the very bad guys that are, you know, experimenting on Eri and everything, where you have Overhaul in charge. So there's, there's different comparisons, and it all depends on like what lens you want to look through. In the case of Wano, particularly during the, going after Orochi and everything, the Yakuza are on the side of, they're on the side of Momonosuke because they want to destroy Orochi because of everything he's done to Wano, and destroy Kaido for the same reasons. So there's, comparisons that can be made there. And of course, it all depends on like what lens you're looking through. And I'll go over this in a little more in detail in a moment, but of course when Hirogoro and his family were in charge, there were then 4 other bosses in the other regions. Who of course were loyal to him. And they were loyal to the Kozuki family because the Kozuki family were very good rulers for the most part when it came to Wano. And of course we know that Hirogoro and Odin were friends, so we know that. And then of course we know that later on, as I said, with Kiroshiro, with him with Denjiro becoming Kiroshiro, he then becomes like Orochi's money changer and his lapdog, as he refers to himself, because he despises what he has to do in order to try to get close to Orochi and try to earn Orochi's trust. And he despises having to do that. And I'll go into that more when I talk about Denjiro and his videos. Going into this, we have, of course, the different, the Yakuza leaders, which are the main ones that we end up interacting with. And for the Flower Capital bosses, there is, of course, Hirogoro, who I already did the full video about, Hirogoro of the Flower. And then we have Kurokoma, who was a rival Flower Capital Yakuza boss to Hirogoro way back during the Odin flashback. So like 41-ish years ago before the present day. And he was the head of his own family. Kurokoma, we've never seen him in the manga. He was mentioned because, and I'll go into this, I'll mention this again in a moment, his family were the ones who put out like the bounty on the cub of the mountain god to get the piglet, the white boar piglet that Kinemon then kidnaps, steals and tries to use to get the platinum coin, the white gold, in order to repay his debts and everything. So we have that. We never see Kurokoma, as I said. We just see some like sketch art of him in, I think, one of the One Piece books that got released a little while ago, that just gives some more information about some of the character designs and building and stuff like that Oda was doing for Wano. Then of course we also have the Kiroshiro family, who is of course led by Kiroshiro Denjiro, and he is of course, I'll talk more about him in his video, but he has his subordinates where we see Kuni, Kaku, and Suke are his 3 main subordinates that we end up seeing, and they're the ones that end up harassing Sanji when they're in the Flower Capital, and Sanji has his noodle stand and everything, and they're kind of the ones going around and doing this is a nice business. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. You probably should, pay us to help make sure that this place stays safe, type of a thing. They're trying to pull that one on him. Then we get into the other Yakuza. So there is Katsuzo, who is, of course, he is the one who is having the funeral at the beginning of the Odin flashback, where he is being cremated. And he was a famous Yakuza, and he was friends with Odin, and they were frequent drinking buddies together, and that's why Odin shows up at his funeral and then makes a giant pot of Odin on top of his on top of him being cremated, which is, I guess, fun. I don't know. I didn't understand that. I get that it's supposed to be like Odin is like, I'm going to share one last pot of Odin with you, with you, my friend, and everything. So we kind of get that. We don't really learn anything else about Katsuzo. We don't do anything, we don't learn anything else there. We know that he has a family. They're rather upset, and then, they're kind of less upset by the end of it. We go through that. And then we get into the regional bosses. And technically the regional boss for the Yakuza-style regional boss for Curry was Ashura Doji. But he was the former mountain bandit and samurai and everything. And of course he became, the retainer of the Kosuke family and the Nine Red Scabbards and everything else like that. And of course he took up the name Shutenmaru and was, the head of the Atama, Mount Atama thieves, the bandits. He kind of acted a bit like a Yakuza in that regard, and probably a bit more prior to his interaction with Odin and being beaten by him and everything. I'll go into that a bit more when I talk about Ashura Doji, when I get to the Scabbards next. So there's Ashura Doji there, and he was the one that was kind of in charge of like the Kuri region as like a Yakuza. And then we have Omasa, who is in charge of the Udon region, or Blood Letter Omasa, as he is referred to. Bit of trivia for him. His epitaph derives from the fact that he expressed his loyalty to Hirogoro in blood writing. So he wrote his devotion, his loyalty to, his oath or whatever to Hirogoro in his own blood, I guess. Or a blood of one of his victims. I don't know. But Omasa, of course, we'll see. I'll talk about him more in the other ones in a moment when I get more into the history of the Yakuza, because these four are almost all together for the main regional bosses. Then we have Tsunogoro, who was the Yakuza of the Hakumai region. And he was Broken Hat Tsunogoro. And his epitaph derives from the appearance of his hair, which after a long battle resembles a broken casa hat. So it's supposed to be like the straw hats that Tama makes in Wano, and his hair kind of looks like one of those. I showed it to my mom, and she's like, "That's weird." Yeah, so we have that, and then we have Cho. Who she was the boss of the Ringo region, and she is Moonflower Ocho, because a lot of the female names in Wano have the O added on in front of it. Although they didn't do that with Komurasaki, so I don't know exactly what that meant. So her name, Cho, in Japanese word refers to butterfly for her hair, which is of course the shape that she has. And her epitaph, the moonflower part, derives from the fact that she is a very skilled nighttime fighter. So lots of her battles would be done at night between her and her enemies or stuff like that is what's kind of implied there. And then we have Yatape, who is the former boss of the Kibi region. And he is Snake Eyes Yatape. And his epitaph is derived from his sharp, snake-like gaze, which makes it hard for people to move when he glares at them. So he has glare if he was a Pokemon. Slightly paralyze his enemies. Or Medusa. There's probably a double reference in there. So we have all of them. I will throw in that I think I heard a theory that there's a possibility that Yatape is one of the ones that has purple hair, and of course Tama has purple hair and Orochi had purple hair, so there's the theory that maybe Yatape has a connection to the Kurozumi family, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know if it's been stated yet if all of these Yakuza bosses have now like reclaimed their place as the heads of each of their respective, regions and everything as the new Yakuza bosses. I don't think any of them are going to be made any of the new daimyo for the different regions. I'm still pretty sure that the rest of the scabbards are going to get set up as daimyo in the different regions or some other connection in that regard. Just from what we've seen so far with Denjiro and with Inarashi, and depending on whoever ended up is going to be revealed to be the daimyo of the Udon region, since I don't remember off the top of my head, and depending on when this goes up, that might be revealed or it might not be. I don't know. Into the history that we have for the Yakuza. So, 50 years before the president, I was wrong, 50 years before the present, we know that a 9-year-old Kozuki Oden formed, he is thrown from a casino due to him getting into violent and drunken fights with their gamblers. He's 9. And this results in him getting sent out of the casino. And then he goes back and he sets the casino on fire. And starting a war that lasted for a year for the Yakuza wars there. And then we know that 42 years ago, Kurokomo developed an ambition to take down Hirogoro. And then he planned to use the cub of the mountain god in order to lure the beast in to fulfill this plan to then try to take out Hirogoro. And he has it all the way, he has a super high bounty on the little white boar. And then 41 years ago is when that actually comes to fruition, when Kurokomo, when some of the other bandits or whatever, Yakuza or whatever subordinates get their hands on the boar, and then Kinemon gets his hands on the boar by taking it from them, and he leads it into the flower capital, or takes it into the flower capital in his attempt to take it to Kurokomo's family, but he's chased away by Hirogoro's family. This then results in the Mountain God incident, where the Mountain God comes down from the mountain to save its cub, which is a boar, and I don't think a cub is the right word for a baby pig, but I guess I'm wrong. I don't know. And they, the Mountain God comes after it and wants to save its baby, and of course this leads into it attacking the flower capital, and of course this leads into then sorry. Still getting used to the new schedule of my job, so I'm still tired. And so what ends up happening is, of course, the Mountain God attacks, and then Odin then fights the Mountain God and defeats the Mountain God and takes the blame for it, so Kinemon does not take the blame. And then we go through all of that, and Hirogoro is present when he sees the Mountain God incident happen. He sees Odin take down the Mountain God. And then we kind of get into a little bit more of a, not exactly sure how this lines up. We know that between 30 and 25 years ago, Ashura Doji took charge of the Yakuza in Kuri to keep them under control while the daimyo Odin was away. So that's when he became the leader of the Yakuza there in order to keep them under control, because that's implying that Hirogoro is still in charge of the Yakuza and the flower capital, so that's not a problem. And then you have the other regions where you have the other regional bosses. Now, we don't know when the other 4 regional bosses, Omasa and Sunogoro and Cho and Yatape, when they became leaders of their respective, regions as the Yakuza. We don't know when that happened. That could have happened prior to Odin's death, and that's why they are still very loyal to Hirogoro. Or it could have been something that they were already in charge when like when this stuff was going on, when Orochi was like, taking over and Kaido was showing up and everything, they may have already been in charge of their various regions, because when I was looking this up, there was nothing that listed how old each of them were. And I would assume that they're probably at least in their 40s, if not maybe 50s, depending on stuff. But again, we don't know exactly. That hasn't been answered one way or the other. That would be an interesting question for Oda. What are the ages of the different regional Yakuza bosses, and what are some of their interests? That would be like an interesting way of doing that. At some point, those four became their different regional bosses, with Omasa in the Udon region, with Tsunogoro in the Hakumai region, with Cho in the Ringo region, and with Yatape in the Kibi region. Meaning most likely these overlapped with the... so this means that they would have lined up with the various different daimyos of these regions. That was like this kind of other side of the coin, I guess. Omasa would have lined up with the Tempura, with the Uzuki family. Tsunogoro would have lined up with Yasuie. Cho would have lined up with Ushimaru. And Yatape would have lined up with the Fugetsu family. And their, respective, representatives at the time, the daimyo that would have been in charge at the time. We don't know that much beyond that. We just know that 8 years later, after, like Orochi is now in charge and Kaido is there and everything, and Oden has returned, we know that Hirogoro's family, due to his ability, that Kaido attacked Hirogoro's family due to his inability to control Hirogoro, because, Hirogoro and the others kept, going up against him, and defying him. So he went after them. Hirogoro was captured and imprisoned in Udon, and his wife and 16 of his men were slaughtered. And this is, of course, as I said, this is one of the igniting factors for Oden going after Kaido and Orochi, going after them to fight. And then we know that within the next 20 years, that the various Yakuza regional bosses were imprisoned as well for defying Orochi and Kaido, until the only one that was left was Ashura Doji. And he had become a mountain bandit by then. By then, all the rest of them had been captured and thrown in the various areas of Udon. We know that in regards to from there, the mantle for the Yakuza kind of gets taken up by Denjiro as Kiyoshiro. And he, he rises in power. He gathers, these, ones that want to work for him and everything because he's strong and they respect him. And he gathers them up, and then he goes and he makes his plan to, if I use this position, I can get close to Orochi. And by doing so, I can then try to learn his weaknesses and gain his trust. And then I can, build us up, and eventually I can then kill Orochi. I can, execute him. I can, assassinate him. And that is Kuroshiro's intent. That is Denjiro's intent. And he does this amazingly for 20 years. Between after Oden's death and after he, changes, literally his face and his hair change from his grief and his anger. He, then goes into the Flower Capital, gets followers, and develops a setup, and he becomes, the boss of the Flower Capital again. And he builds up, he's got his gambling houses, and he has money changers, and all of this other stuff that he then, is able to then present lots of this money to Orochi. And he, of course, eventually ends up getting Komurasaki, as in, he saves Hiyori, he brings her in, and he starts training her. And she, he explains her the plan. And of course, I'll go into this more when I talk about Denjiro and when I talk about Hiyori, respectively, for both of those. That eventually what ends up happening is, of course, she becomes the most sought after, the top courtesan in all of Wano, and is considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. even rivaling the Mermaid Princess for Shirahoshi and Boa Hancock for, as Pirate Empress. Komurasaki is said to, rival both of them in beauty. And eventually, of course, Denjiro, he builds up all of this stuff as the leader of the, as the leader there. As the leader of the Yakuza there. And then we get into the actual Wano arc. And it's kind of the first interaction we have is we have Sanji is harassed. His noodle stand is harassed. His soba stand is harassed by Kaku, Kuni, and Suke. They show up. They harass Sanji. He beats them up because A, they're harassing his customers. B, I think they end up insulting his food. And C, they take Tama's noodles and dump them on the ground, which does not make Sanji happy, and then he beats the heck out of him. Also, we see Kiroshiro is at one of the bars or whatever, tea houses, whatever, and we see Robin there in the background dancing as one of the new geisha. So we're kind of introduced to him that way. So Frankie also helps beat up the Yakuza goons. We know that later, and of course I'll go into this more detail when I get to the other characters. We know that Kiroshiro is at the banquet that Orochi is throwing, where he ends up, he gets contacted by, Suke tells him that, this guy beat us up and everything, so he sends Queen information to send, page 1 after them. Page 1, and then it ends up being, others go after Sanji and everything. For that. So Kiroshiro has developed a fair amount of, sway at this point in time and everything. And we know that Kiroshiro does end up developing somewhat of a friendship with Sasaki, with one of the other Tobi Roppo. So there's that there. We also know that at this event, at the banquet, what ends up happening is, there's kind of two things that happen, I guess, semi-concurrently. Zoro is off in one of the outer regions of Wano, and he ends up at one of the casinos that's run by the Kiroshiro family, and he starts to win a lot, and then they try to, fix it and, cheat and everything, and he doesn't like that, so he gets violent and just destroys the building, whatever. And then we have at the banquet that, of course, Orochi is hosting, and, of course, Kiroshiro is there, and, of course, Komurasaki is there. And what ends up happening is he ends up then having to pretend to cut down Komurasaki, to give this appearance of him cutting her down. To give her a samurai's mercy. We, of course, as the audience, find out that no, she's not dead. She's fine. This was all planned. It's been planned for them from the beginning, type of a thing. He would pretend to kill her and everything else. And so Denjiro is involved in that. Again, I'll go into more of this in detail when I talk about Denjiro and such. Then we get to the Udon prison, where, of course, we have Luffy ends up meeting Hirogoro. And Hirogoro then helps, train Luffy in, the sumo inferno and everything, with helping him learn more about, how to control his haki and how to turn it into the flowing sakura and everything for the Ryuo techniques and everything, and how to be able to, start to access that power, and trains him there. And of course, when when Big Mom shows up, they end up having, she ends up chasing Luffy and Hirogoro through the rest of the prison, destroying all the walls between the prison, and freeing, mostly, the rest of the prisoners that are there during the prisoner revolt. After the prisoner revolt, when Queen's gone and Tama has tamed all the smiles that are there with her dongos, they are then able to introduce the rest of the Yakuza. Because Hirogoro had mentioned to Luffy that there are 4 other members of the Yakuza trapped here, 4 other former bosses of the Yakuza that are trapped here in Udon as well. And if we can free them, I know that they will help us. And they do. The rest of them are then freed, along with the rest of the other prisoners that are at the Udon prison. They are now free, and they help. They've seen what Luffy is willing to do, and they decide to help him. And he has Hiro Goro alongside of him, along with Kiku and Raizo and Kawamatsu, and he has Momonosuke, and of course the rest of them end up. The rest of the the Yakuza heads, the four of them, Amasa, Sunogoro, Cho, and Yatape, they all see this and everything. And they see that Luffy and Hirogoro are starting to develop a bit of a friendship. And one of the things that they don't like, is because of their respect for Hirogoro. They don't like it when Luffy just starts talking to him very casually and just calling him like old man Hio or grandpa Hio, and they don't like that, and they like grab Luffy and they're like kind of getting ready to end him, and Hirogoro, for like being very disrespectful to Hirogoro, and he's like, stop it, you four, that's fine, it's fine if he calls me that, it's okay. And they're like, fine, but if you do it again, we will end you. Type of a thing. And of course, I don't know, I wonder how many times Luffy had to be threatened. But we know that at this point, that after that, once they're all freed from the prison, that each of them end up then going to their respective regions and helping with gathering up their allies, their followers, and gathering up the supplies and everything, the weapons and the ships and everything else that they're going to need in order for them to then, be ready for when it's time for the raid for the Fire Festival, for the raid on Onigashima, for like that 2-week time frame. So that's what they're working on there. And they all go to their respective regions and they're able to meet up with the other ones. And then, of course, there's several things that happen there as well. They're all ready to, meet up when it's time. On the day of the Fire Festival, Orochi leaves Kuroshiro in charge of the flower capital while he goes to, Onigashima for the Fire Festival. Kuroshiro then frees all of the imprisoned samurai that were imprisoned in Retsetsu town because they were all gathered up because they had the crescent moon on their ankle. They were all gathered up for that reason, and Orochi refused to release them even after Yasuie's execution. And with that information that was left for them in Yasuie's message, with him altering the flyer and everything, they then make their way to the correct port, the Tokage port, where they the Habu port, excuse me. They make their way to the Habu port, and then Kuroshiro and his Yakuza and his family, along with Hirogoro and all the rest of the different leaders of the other Yakuza groups, have gathered along with all of the other samurai and the former prisoners, and Law's crew, Kid's crew, Luffy's crew, all of that. They've all gathered together, the bandit, everyone that is gathering to fight against Kaido and Orochi, to fight and try to save their country. All of the Yakuza members are all there as well, and they all show up. And, they gather, with the rest of the pirate mink samurai, ninja alliance, and head off. And of course, they end up then making their way to Onigashima. Once they are there, all of them are disguised with Kinemon's devil fruit power. He disguises them all to look like beast pirates, so that way they can then infiltrate and then attack from within, which, to be fair, ends up going fairly well. Luffy and Kid and Zoro causing a scene notwithstanding. But, Law put that into his plan of like, yeah, they're going to cause a scene. I know that. It's fine. I planned around that this time, as opposed to what happened in Dressrosa, where I didn't plan for it. Because I didn't know Luffy very well yet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that ends up happening there. Then we get into the moment where they do, because like they're there for the Momonosuke being held up on the crucifix, and when Orochi is assassinated by Kaido, and then when Orochi is decapitated by Kaido, and then Kaido is attacked by the scabbards, and then he goes up to the roof, and then all of the Yakuza members and reveal themselves, along with the samurai and the rest of the pirates and the rest of the people from Wano that are there to fight to save their country and everything. They then attack, and we have like the huge battles that are going on. At one point in time, I think Cho runs into Kid and Killer and kind of sends them somewhere to go and, go find this way and you'll make your way here or whatever. I don't remember. And then the next big thing that happens is, of course, when Queen shows up and ends up, activating the Isoni virus and is attacking everybody with it, and it's spreading all over the place. And this results in a couple of different things. Omasa, I believe, ends up getting, infected, and Hirogoro ends up infected. And this results in Hirogoro getting his strength back, and he kind of, turns back into like his younger self, more pumped up and everything, ready to fight. And Drake, along with the rest of the Yakuza leaders, work to try to guard Chopper while he is working on the antidote for the Isoni virus. Various other things happen there. They get the, antidote from Apu via Zoro, and then, Chopper's able to work with that. And one of the things that happens is, of course, as I said, both Omasa and Hirogoro are infected by the Isoni virus, and they're able to stay in control a little better than some of the other, beast pirates that are infected by it, and some of the other samurai and such, and Yakuza members that are being infected by the Isoni virus. I don't know if that has to do with just like your own willpower over the virus and able to fight against it, so you can still be in control of your body to a degree. But that's something that they're able to work with, and they're able to help with that. And when it's as stuff is like as the clock is ticking down, what happens is, of course, Omasa and Hirogoro are beginning to succumb to the virus. And it's like, well, we don't know if Chopper is getting any closer to figuring this out to heal everybody. And we have like the time crunch, the very dramatic moment where it's, I believe it's Yatape is getting ready to execute Hirogoro to stop him, because he knows that if he goes out of his, if he loses control, he's just going to cause so much more damage and everything. And Omasa is the same way. So Yatape is getting ready to end Hirogoro, and Tsunogoro is getting ready to end Omasa. Thankfully, Chopper manages to show up just in time and administer the antidote, and then air disperse all the rest of the antidote to everybody else, so they're all healed. And then, of course, they're all present for when Chopper then transforms into his monster point, shouts, "I am not a Tanuki," and just bitch slaps Queen. Which everybody is just like, sorry. Which is just funny. I love the fact that it's all of these Yakuza members and Drake, and I think a few others that are just like, sorry for calling you a Tanuki all this time. So we have that moment. We do see some of the Yakuza's reactions to when Kaido first announced that Luffy and the Scabbards had lost, and then of course the kind of the relief that goes through them when Momonosuke says that Luffy has a message for them and that he's not finished, and to rally the alliance forces and everything. And then there's like several different things. There's not that much more that we see for the Yakuza. They are present in the hall when a gigantic pink dragon comes flying through the performance floor with Luffy hanging on for dear life. And they're just like, oh my god, what is that? And of course, that's Momonosuke in his dragon form, now that he's an adult, helping get Luffy back to the roof. Hirogoro and the rest of them are also there when Queen launches his neck and his tail out of his body to then wrap around Sanji, and that just has like a very funny reaction, which I kind of forgot about. I didn't forget about the reaction overall. I forgot that they were there for the reaction, which is just funny. For like, yeah, that would be my reaction too if I saw a dinosaur do that of, what the F just happened? And then of course, the Yakuza bosses and Hirogoro are of course there in the hall when everything else happens with Luffy finally manages to defeat Kaido. They land the hall safely. Raizo and Jinbei are able to like put out all the fire in the hall and everything. Fire within Onigashima and everything. So a lot of that all is just, they're there for that, but they're not really super involved in it. And then, of course, they are all there after the raid for the big festival and everything that they hold afterwards. And as I said, that's about all that we get. Supposedly, or like I would kind of think that like each of the Yakuza are going to go back to their different regions and like retake their positions there because they have this very good bond with the Kozuki family already. Plus, some of them would end up having pretty good bonds with whoever ends up being the new daimyos of, their different regions, and end up, working with them. That was a bus. So there's, connections there that can be made. In regards to some of the trivia here, so in the world of One Piece, the Yakuza refers to the underground organization of Wano, but there are a few characters outside of the country whose designs are based on them as well. It's not like based on the Yakuza. Those would be Jinbei and Shiki. Jinbei even has done several things that I was like introducing himself similar to how like a Yakuza does it in certain movies or in certain shows type of a thing. And in the Boss Luffy historical specials that they've done, Buggy and his crew are based on the Yakuza. They play the Yakuza there, which is just kind of fun. And then, of course, the father-son cups used when multiple crews form a fleet in the story is based on how the Yakuza swear in new members of their organization. So that's very similar to what happens when, I mean, like that's symbolized, some of that is symbolized with like Luffy, Ace, and Sabo when they use their sake cups with, the Grand Fleet drinking the sake with Luffy when they form the Grand Fleet. When Jinbei, returned his sake cup to Big Mom at the wedding and everything. And, some other bits like that get referenced here and there for how those different crew dynamics are handled or kind of based off of, Yakuza traditions and stuff like that. And, of course, there's been lots of movies and shows that are based around the Yakuza. And I'm not surprised that, Oda brought it in here in Wano in regards to, Luffy and the Straw Hats interacting with them and everything else. I mean, I understand that, like, during the time that Orochi would have been in control, the Yakuza probably acted as, before they were all locked up, that they probably continued to fight against Orochi and everything else like that. But if they were on good terms with, like, the Kozuki family anyway, I don't get why exactly there would have been a lot of, like, underhanded deals that needed to be done. But then again, I don't know. That is like, with the Mafia and stuff like that, it's a similar thing. It's not exactly the same, and I understand that. But it's, it's bits that I don't quite get. But that's what we have there. So, that's what I have for the Yakuza. As I said, I will be going into the Scabbards next, and those will be, oh my god, so many videos for the Scabbards. And then I'm going to do Kaido. Kaido is going to have a lot. And then I get into Toko and Tama and Momonosuke and Hiyori for finishing up Wano. Again, some of those are going to take a while to get through. But those are what I have. This should be one of the last videos going up for before the end of the year. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, everything in there. I hope that you are having a, joyous holiday season. I hope next year goes freaking better for our world and our country. God, I hope so. On so many levels. And we'll see what happens then. So, bye.